Because a very old catalog that I found online does mention that a Finnish edition of Rolling Thunder, the scenario pack, was in fact also released in Finnish, but I've seen no other mention of it. It could be that it was released, but I've seen zero copies of it anywhere, and no one I know has ever seen that particular scenario set in Finnish, so we don't actually know if it exists.
Well, I'll be damned. Not only does it exist, but I actually have it. Yes, indeed, it is in fact the Finnish edition of Rolling Thunder, the scenario pack for BattleTech and MechWarrior, released in 1992. And I have it in my hands. I'm amazed to actually have it because I really didn't think it actually existed, like I talked about in my video. I'd never met anyone who'd seen this thing. But it does exist, and I have it. Like 2 weeks after putting out the video where I talked about it, I was just, browsing like Finnish auction sites, looking for BattleTech stuff, as you're wont to do, and someone had put up like a package of BattleTech stuff in Finnish. The TRO and Game of Armored Combat, which I already had, and the MechWarrior RPG, which I didn't have, but, a friend does, so if I want to look at it at some point, I can probably ask him. But it also included this. So, I absolutely had to get it. As it turned out, a friend wanted the other items, so we bought this together, and I get this for like 30 euros, which is a steal for something that's so rare and still in, decent condition, I suppose. And it's one of those items where I'm not really interested in what's inside. I'm more excited about the fact that it exists and that I actually have it. But it's, it's cool to read about Rolling Thunder. It's like a company of mechs in BattleTech, and the scenario pack is sort of their story at a particular point in time. You got some like character profiles and their mechs and stuff, and of course you've got some scenarios. What's interesting to me about these old scenarios is that these games are pretty huge, actually. You're supposed to play like full companies of stuff. You're playing as the full like Rolling Thunder company against like a company of combined arms, which is pretty cool. But maybe this scenario pack was never intended for beginner players or something. Probably more for the advanced players. But that's what we got in Finnish. Pretty cool. And like I briefly mentioned here, I also got the MechWarrior RPG book. I'm just making this video before I have to give this to my friend who actually wanted this book. I'm just not that much of an RPG player, really, so I don't really want this book. Released in 1991 in the city where I actually live right now. And it's just fun to flip through a book that has like a different perspective on the BattleTech universe. It has like a more lore about stuff that isn't like talked about in the different Finnish releases. For example, there's a bit on Kamstar here, which has been translated very interestingly to Tähti V, which literally means star V. V standing for viestintä, which is communications. And I just think it's a very cool and sort of funny way to translate Kamstar. It's not something I can really explain why it's funny, but I think Finnish people will find it sort of amusing at least. It's a very 90s sort of retro and a really fun translation, I would say. Also, this book has other very interesting translations. For example, the name of like a MechWarrior pilot has been translated into Meksturi, which is a fantastic translation. It's like a mechster maybe, and that's a fun translation, I would say. I would say that out of these books, the best translation, or the one that's had like the most effort put into it, would be the MechWarrior RPG. You can see that from like the funky retro examples from before, sort of daring, funny, cool translations instead of like lame ones, I would say. Well, that's a question of taste, of course, but I just like them better. But also little things like this. For example, the Great Houses have been translated as something else than an actual house. You know, in Finnish we have the word talo, which just means a literal house. But in this one, it's been translated as hovi, which has a more of a royal family sort of quality to it. So I would say that's a better translation. I just think it's very funny that all of these different products have totally different translators, even though they were released like a couple of years apart. And it sort of looks like that they didn't really read the stuff that had already been released in Finnish, so there's like a lot of like discrepancies and you know, some very funky translations. So there you go. This is my sort of completed collection of Finnish BattleTech stuff, I suppose. You know, I don't really have the MechWarrior RPG because it's going to a friend of mine, but, you know, I have access to it, I suppose. Maybe I'll buy a copy of my own at some point. But, you know, my collection is in fact complete now, and I can focus on something else than Finnish editions of BattleTech stuff in my BattleTech collection. Except, why is there a 2 on the Rolling Thunder cover? Why is there a 2? What's number 1? I think I saw a catalog of like other RPG releases on the backside here. Let's have a look at that. You get Dungeons and Dragons stuff, Dungeons and Dragons, BattleTech, yeah, BattleTech. That's the board game, the map set, the role-playing book, Harmaan kuoleman legioona. I think that's the Grey Death Legion scenario pack. Oh shit!